Hello everyone, Big Clinky here with a very special video. It has been, probably not exactly as of when this video goes up, but around this time, 25 years since the very first Fire Emblem game, Fire Emblem The Dark Dragon and the Sword of Light, was released in Japan. So yeah, it's the series' 25th anniversary, and it's a very big occasion. Since this is tied with Pokemon as my #1 all-time favourite game series, I thought I'd do a bit of a retrospective here on just my personal history with the series. I did this for Pokemon, and I really wanted to do one for Fire Emblem eventually, and it looks like I have the perfect excuse to now that it's the series anniversary, so I thought I'd talk about every game in the series in the order that I played them in. So not an actual game order, but I'm going to go in the order that I encountered them. And I'll give my thoughts both on the games and on just what kind of circumstances surrounded me playing them, what my memories were of them at the time. Because I have some pretty interesting ones to share. Now, hopefully this will also serve as a way for me to kind of share some of my views on a few Fire Emblem games that I probably won't be doing playthroughs of for this channel. So, that hopefully should shed some light on a few things. But, yeah, let's get right into it. Like the vast majority of non-Japanese fans, my first ever Fire Emblem game was Fire Emblem 7 Blazing Sword on the Game Boy Advance. Well, I didn't know it was Fire Emblem 7 at the time. Like most people, I thought it was the first game in the series. Also, I don't know how many of you guys thought this, but am I the only one who thought that Hector was Marth and Eliwood was Roy? I honestly thought, oh, they must have just changed the names in the localization or something. Because, yeah, red-haired sword user, blue-haired, well, not really sword user. I admit I got a little bit suspicious of Hector using axes, but still, I kept thinking, hey, he's Marth and he's Roy, obviously. And then I got to the actual epilogue and saw, oh, right, Roy's Eliwood's son. Okay. Still didn't know where Marth was from, though. Now, my actual experience with this game was kind of weird. I was very, very interested in it. I saw glowing reviews pretty much all over the place. In fact, I still remember one comment from a review magazine that I used to read as a kid, that simply said, "I no longer have an arse anymore. Fire Emblem kicked it." Yeah, I was pretty interested in the game after reading things like that. By that time, I was actually a big fan of Advance Wars. I'd got the Advance Wars 2 Black Hole Rising for my birthday a few years ago, maybe even only a couple of years before that time. And yeah, I knew that this was from the makers of Advance Wars, and so I really thought that I'd find it quite interesting. I read about it, and I had read about permanent character death as well, and I was thinking, oh, that's kind of interesting. And so, my actual experience with getting this game, I probably would have got it anyway, but the very bizarre thing is, I actually only got this game by complete accident. My parents accidentally got it for me for my birthday when looking for Pokemon Fire Red. Somehow they must have confused two games with the word fire in the title. The thing is, though, I did end up getting Fire Red for that birthday as well, so that was a very good birthday. I played this game, and I immediately loved it. I completely got absorbed into the characters. I pretty much marathon Lynn's story all in the space of one day, and just loved every single moment of it. Around that time, only a few days after my birthday, actually, me and my family went on a trip over to another state in Australia, right, pretty much the exact opposite of where I live, all the way on the other side of the country, to visit some of our relatives, and we stayed there for a whole week. My most memorable moments of that trip are of playing Fire Emblem, and of playing Pokemon Fire Red as well. I played through both games around the time. I remember that towards the end of the holiday, I was around the time of Battle Before Dawn, so I did play quite a lot of it in that time. Not that, I mean, the holiday wasn't that memorable, it's just that I'm such a ridiculously geeky gamer that I tend to remember places I've been to by what games I was playing at the time. So I remember that holiday by, oh yeah, that was when I was playing Fire Emblem. As for my thoughts on the game itself, well, I played this one a lot. I replayed it again and again, making sure to use different characters every time. I just really loved it. It's a pretty decent length for a Fire Emblem game as well. It's actually, I think, still one of the longest in the series. And having 3 main characters is the most, I think, lords that any game in the series has had. Well, I mean, technically Awakening also kind of has 3, but 2 of them aren't forced deployments in every chapter, so yeah. Overall, though, I do think this game's a little overhyped within the fandom, and it's gotten the kind of attention that Generation 1 of Pokemon has got lately, where a bunch of fans are like, oh, we played this game first, and none of the other games are as good as this one. Well, I still think that it's a good Fire Emblem game. I wouldn't say it's the best, and the reason why I don't particularly feel like playing it for this channel is because it's just so well known, everyone does it, and it's like the Final Fantasy VII of the series, and it's ironic because I actually haven't played Final Fantasy VII, but, yeah, I just feel that I wouldn't really have much new to say about it, and again, as much as, like, it was my first game, I don't have quite as big an emotional connection to it as I do some of the other games in the series. But still, I think this is a very good, solid entry in the series. It's definitely up there in the, definitely in the top third of the series for me. Actually, probably in the top quarter. But yeah, I know my top 2, but I keep, the others keep switching around. I pretty much love all the games, though. The next game in the series that I actually played was Path of Radiance. It was a few years before I actually managed to get it, and I hadn't really been following it in the news very much. I remember seeing an article in the very same gaming magazine I talked about earlier that talked about a potential GameCube Fire Emblem game that was in development, and that was back at the time when it still looked like this. Yeah, if you can't read Japanese, Ike's name is Paris here, which, incidentally, is where Priam's Japanese name comes from. But, yeah, we basically didn't know very much about this game. This was really all the information that we had, and it took a while before I actually discovered the game. I was just randomly looking through my local game store one day when I actually saw a copy there, and I was like, huh, Fire Emblem GameCube game. Okay, I didn't know that was out, but I'll take it. And I saw the blue-haired guy on the cover, and I was like, okay, now surely that must be Marth, right? Nope, Ike. Of course, Ike did end up being in Smash Brothers, much to my delight. I remember when Ike was actually announced for Smash Brothers, when I saw that announcement on the website for Brawl, I was like, yes! 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 That just made me so excited, because, yeah, finally a character from a Fire Emblem game I actually knew. Plus, Ike is awesome. He's one of my favourite Fire Emblem protagonists simply because of how different he is from all the others, and how utterly ridiculously powerful he is in battle as well. But anyway, thoughts on the actual game. I played this one for a while, and honestly, this is still one of my favourites in the series. I really, really love this game. It's fairly basic by Fire Emblem standard, it's not very long, and it has no real side quest chapters. And the plot is also pretty basic, but just the characters, to me, are by far some of the most memorable in the series. And it's just, they stick out in my mind so much. And the way the story is written, just the way that it progresses, all the different little conflicts that you get into, all of the character interactions, the interaction between all the nations, between the different races, and just all the characters' personal journeys. I just really love this game. And even gameplay-wise, it's fairly standard, but it's really solid. It's overall pretty balanced. I mean, there are only a couple of characters that are kind of overpowered. It's not too easy and not too hard, although admittedly I'm annoyed that they removed the Japanese Maniac mode, because I did find hard mode to be a little too easy by hard mode standards, but still, overall, this was, again, apart from, like, magic being very, very weak, it was a very solid game, and it's still probably one of my most highly recommended games in the series. I still really, really like this one. And that's pretty much all I can say. I mean, I obviously love this game. Now, as for which game I actually played next, I'm not entirely sure, but I think it was Sacred Stones. Now, Sacred Stones was another game that I just randomly found in a game store and decided to buy it when I wasn't even looking for it. I'd heard a bit about this game, I'd read about it in some gaming review press, but it was kind of a bit strange, because back when Fire Emblem 7 finished, and the ending was a massive cliffhanger, everyone was all like, oh, when's Fire Emblem 2 coming out? If only they knew. But anyway, I was kind of like that too, and I was thinking the next game would be some kind of continuation on its storyline. Then I hear about Sacred Stones and realize that it's completely different and set in its own universe, and has these weird monster enemies, but a lot of new interesting classes. I remember looking at the back of the box, seeing the Great Knight class, I was like, hey, that actually looks pretty cool, I like that. So I did get this game. In fact, I wasn't even in my local city. I was actually on another holiday, I think, when I found this. And I played it, and now this is kind of interesting. I know a lot of people absolutely despise this game, and I do admit Fire Emblem 7 was a tough act to follow, but I really don't think people give this game enough credit. I actually really like Sacred Stones a lot, though I do admit it's still fairly low on the series for me, only because of how short it is, and it's a real shame. I feel this game could have been amazing if it was longer, but only 20 main story chapters, and the random monster skirmishes in the tower and ruins are just not enough extra content to make it any longer. It is by far the shortest game in the entire series, and I admit it really suffers for that. And that is the game's biggest flaw, and yeah, it really detracts from the game a lot. But that aside, I actually think this game has a fairly decent story, mostly on Ephraim's route more than Erica's. Erica's is pretty cliche, but on Ephraim's route, you get to know the demon, well, not exactly the Demon King, but essentially the main villain is a lot more fleshed out on his route and a lot more interesting in his motivations. The characters are also pretty memorable to me. I like a lot of the supports in the game. I like the character designs. I know I don't normally compliment on character designs, but I do think that a lot of them look pretty memorable to me. The branching promotions added a lot of replay value. The trainees did as well. I know a lot of people hate the trainees, but I don't. And here's the main thing that I really like about this game, the soundtrack. I personally think that this has the single most underrated Fire Emblem soundtrack of all time. In fact, I might even like Sacred Stones' soundtrack more than Blazing Swords, and that's saying something. I know a lot of reviewers said the soundtrack was less memorable than the previous games. I don't agree at all. Sacred Stones has many great tracks that really stand out to me. The recruitment theme is one of my favourites in the series, as is a lot of the map themes. The world map music, especially the powerful foe boss theme. That guitar riff, man, that on a Game Boy Advance just sounds amazing. And in fact, I would go so far as to say Sacred Stones may have possibly my favourite Game Boy Advance soundtrack of all time. I just love the music in this game so much. In fact, I may even at one point consider doing a playthrough of Sacred Stones just for the music alone, really. That and the fact that I don't hate it nearly as much as most people seem to do. I do admit it being given away as an ambassador title on the 3DS might not have been the best choice. I know it's a fairly short game, but I think Blazing Sword would have fit better as an introduction to the Fire Emblem series for more people. But still, again, Sacred Stones is surprising to me. I admit that it does suffer a lot for how short it is, but it has a special place in my heart simply for the soundtrack alone. Now, I think it was around this time that I discovered that the Fire Emblem series had roots that went back much further than Westerners knew. I discovered through the internet the Japan-only games. I first found out about this while I was looking at Path of Radiance guides and seeing Astra, and they mentioning something about Astra being similar to a shooting star sword skill from an earlier game in the series. At first I was thinking they were referring to Sacred Stones because that game also had skills, and then I realized I couldn't find a shooting star sword skill in that game. Then I did some more digging and I found, oh, the Fire Emblem series stretches back a lot further than I thought. And the one that I originally played first was actually the 7th game in the series. So, naturally, I got really curious about the Japan-only Fire Emblem games. Now, 2 of these games really caught my attention. The first one was, of course, the game that Fire Emblem 7 was in fact a prequel to. Not only did I want to experience the story, but I also concluded through my research that that game had probably the best fan translation out of all of them, so I kind of wanted to play that one just for that. The other one was a Fire Emblem game with no other connections to ones, but I found very fascinating. Now, of these two, one would go on to become my favourite game in the series, the other would go on to become my least favourite in the series. So, I'm really sorry for people who like this game, but I'm going to get my least favourite out of the way first. Fire Emblem 6 is my personal least favourite game in the series, and I will admit, this is mostly personal. I actually think some other games in the series are objectively worse than this one, but this game, to me, I just have the most personal bad memories with it. And this is part of the reason for this video. I'm almost definitely not going to play through this game, only because I wouldn't have good things to say about it. I'm kind of taking a page out of the book of another Let's Player here on YouTube, Bro Mithril. He chooses not to play the Mega Man X series just because he personally dislikes it, and he feels that would be unfair to people who do like the game. He'd rather they watch a playthrough done by someone who does like the game and would have good things to say about it. That's the exact reason why I don't want to play Fire Emblem 6 for this channel. Because I would be ranting about every single facet of this game for a long time. Now, if you like this game, please go ahead and skip this section of the video. I really don't want to offend anyone. If you're sticking around, oh boy, get ready. I'm about to rant about why I dislike this game so much, so let's go into a few things. Firstly, and here's the main reason, the story and characters are just so bland and unmemorable to me. The story is pretty much a direct rehash of Fire Emblem 3, and I know that a lot of Fire Emblem games do this, but 6 took it to a whole new level. In 6, nearly the entire cast are blatant copies of characters from Marth's universe. I mean, Marcus looks almost exactly like Jagan, Guinevere and her role is almost identical to Nina, Melody and Minerva are pretty much dead ringers. You can find entire charts listing the characters and just how similar they even look to each other. And the story isn't exactly explored all that well. It's mostly just a generic, good resistance goes against an evil empire thing. And okay, I'll talk about that facet of it a bit later. But the whole backstory about the Scouring and the war between humans and dragons, that had so much potential, and I really would have liked to, because very few other games in the series have really tried to explore just how dragons and humans ever interacted with each other, and I would have liked to have seen more of that, but the problem was, aside from Arcadia and just the massive info dump that was the second last chapter, which was basically Yarn going, "Allow me to explain everything," basically him going all Ishizu Ishtar on everyone, it just, I just didn't feel that it just did a very good job of explaining itself, really. The main thing to me, though, is the characters. Now, firstly, fan favourites from Fire Emblem 7 got killed off really early, like Hector, or had little to no involvement in the plot at all, like Eliwood. Or, well, the one character from Fire Emblem 7 who was kind of involved in this, well, yeah. Also Merlinus, for some reason, he became such a jerk in 20 years. Pretty strange that, considering just how heartwarming his final scene was in Blazing Sword, seeing him turn into a complete dick was kind of annoying. Roy also, apart from being a bit more politically savvy than you'd expect from his age, Roy is pretty much a generic Fire Emblem lord with very little personality, but it's everyone else who really bothers me. So many of the characters in this game have very little personality to speak of at all. Alan and Lance in particular, the Red and Green Knights. Now, I know Kent and Sane were kind of a tough act to follow, but seriously, Alan and Lance are almost entirely indistinguishable from each other. They are by far the most boring Cain and Abel characters in the entire series to me. Both of them just have no personality, and their supports, oh my god, their supports. Their supports almost made me rage quit the game by how boring they were. Oh, hi, Alan, how's your sword skills going? Huh, neither good nor bad. How's your sword skills going? Ah! sorry, it's just kind of annoying to me. There's a whole ton of other characters who just have very little personality as well. In fact, it's easy to list the characters who do have personality, because you can count them on one hand. I guess Lilina kinda does, and I do like her relationship with Roy, but to me, the only playable characters who have any kind of decent support conversations or backstory are Astol and Ingrid. Apart from that, I couldn't care less for anyone. Speaking of support conversations, that's another reason why I dislike this game so much. Now, I admit, this was the first game in the series to have support conversations, so they kind of had an excuse here. But to me, the fact that all these characters come off as bland cardboard cutouts with no personality, even with supports, to me, that's actually worse than not having support conversations at all. I honestly think that not doing something at all is still better than doing something and doing it badly. Now, earlier you'll notice that I said the only playable characters I thought had any semblance of a personality. Well, here's the thing. There is one character who I think has an excellently developed character arc and personality. In fact, they're one of my favourite characters in the series, but they're not a playable character. No, that character is Zephyl, the main antagonist of the story. I really think his backstory is one of the few things Fire Emblem 6 does well. It's one of the few things that I like about the game. He really has understandable reasons for being driven to villainy, and I think the idea of a human who sympathizes more with dragons than his own race is kind of interesting, and you gotta admit that his father was a colossal jerk to him, especially in Blazing Sword as well. Zephyl was one of those characters who was so sympathetic that I really wished that he was recruitable. I desperately wanted there to be some way you could recruit him. I even wish that someone would make like some kind of ROM hack where he was recruitable. Maybe he joined you as a Gateau character in the last chapter or something, if you did a specific series of conditions. But my point still stands that when the most memorable character to me, and to me the only really adequately developed character, is the main villain, that's not exactly a good point of the game to me. Now, not only that, I also dislike this game based on gameplay. This game, to me, has some of the absolute flat-out worst characters statistically ever on both the pre-promoted and the S side of the spectrum. On the S side, you have people like Wendy, who, as some people will put, has all the weaknesses of an Armor Knight but none of the strengths. Sophia, who gets one-rounded by literally everything and is a forced deployment in the most annoying chapter in the game. And even characters who are kinda good like Lina, she still has some major stat flaws like bad speed. And then you have the pre-promotes, oh boy. You got people like Garrett, who were kind of pretty much useless. People like, Diane's okay, Yuno is terrible, she only has the triangle attack going for her. Zealot, now I know some people recently have liked Zealot, I really don't. He's one of my least favourite characters in the series gameplay-wise. In fact, I even had a running joke for a long time of making fun of him, that's how bad I thought he was. And the other thing that I don't like about Fire Emblem... Oh, okay, I forgot to mention. Roy. To me, Roy is possibly... Fire Emblem 5 Leaf may give him some competition, but Roy is one of the worst lords in the entire series. And it's not because of his stats, really. It's because of the fact that he doesn't freaking promote until there are only 3 chapters left in the game. You spend pretty much 60% of the whole game with Roy at level 20, being able to gain no experience, totally useless, and still forced for every single chapter. He is complete dead weight for so much of the game, and the really annoying thing is, by the time he does promote, he's actually pretty good. It's just a shame that that comes so late. And now back to what I was trying to say before. The other reason why I personally dislike this game, its RNG utterly hates me. I've got so unlucky in this game in the past. I've had 2 separate chapters where the boss was the last enemy left on the map, and the boss criticaled and killed someone with a 2% chance. That happened to me twice. So yeah, I'm pretty sure that that game's RNG wants me to stay far away from it, and I'm okay with that. I'm really sorry about that negative rant, but anyway, let's get on to more positive things. Fire Emblem 4, Genealogy of the Holy War. This game is my favourite game in the entire Fire Emblem series. And I like it for quite a lot of reasons. I like how different it is. The big maps give it such an epic feel. Also, the legendary weapons, just the massive stat boost they give you. It just, again, really adds to the epic feel of the game. But I admit they're kind of broken most of the time, but enemies do use them too later on, which makes this game a little bit more balanced than, say, Awakening is. The story and characters stand out to me quite a lot. This game does have one of the darker Fire Emblem plotlines, mostly in the first half of the game, which almost feels like a flat-out deconstruction of main Fire Emblem series conventions, in that the main hero ends up messing things up royally every time he invades countries, and things just get so screwed up to the point where, well, I won't spoil it in case you haven't played it, but I'm pretty sure most of you have. The ending of Part 1 is still a pretty amazing moment that sticks with me, and I still consider Sigurd to be the archetypal tragic hero out of Fire Emblem series characters, but the other characters really stand out to me too. I pretty much like all of them, and I also like the fact that the game has such a small number of characters, but expects you to use all of them. Literally every character has something unique. Everyone, even people like Arden, have at least something that only they can do, and I like that about the game. I know that some characters are overall more useful than others, but at the very least, everyone does have some way to stand out, and that's what the developer was specifically going for. The fact that certain characters, they might not have the best stats out of people, but they might have a useful skill. Now, I admit Pursuit being restricted, as in the ability to double attack, being restricted to the Pursuit skill, that kind of annoyed me, and I think that was a fairly questionable change, especially when it came to passing down the skill to the second generation. But I was kind of fine with the critical skill working like it did. The Holy Blood and 2 generation system as well just adds to that epic multi-generational feel. The fact that your characters, you've got characters in previous games who are the descendants of legendary heroes, but here you can actually physically see it, and it plays into the game mechanics too. And that's something that I really like as well. I would have preferred if Ira and Holland's children could use the Balmung like Shannon could, but anyway. Speaking of which, the pairing system. Now, I admit the pairing system is nowhere near as fleshed out as it is in Awakening. Certain pairs don't even get conversations at all, and because of that, I generally always went with the implied canon pairings, almost very little deviation in my playthroughs. If you know my Awakening stuff, I like hints of canon more than anything else, and I very rarely like to just pair people just because I want to. There has to be at least some kind of canon support for it to me, and that's why I like that in Fire Emblem 4, a lot of the canon pairings are actually the best ones. Of course, I'm not into the so-called optimal setup that most people do. I've never liked Levin and Tiltu. I've never liked Forseti Arthur. I much prefer Forseti Sed or Seti. I just think he's amazing. Mostly because that pairing is canon, but anyway. I've also never liked killing off Sylvia to get her substitutes. I actually like her main children much more than her substitutes. The only real variance I ever do in my pairings is I often can't decide whether to pair Edain with either Jumka or Midale. I tend to alternate between them on my playthroughs, so that's really the only variance that I tend to have. But yeah. Other than that, though, this game is still one of my fondestly remembered, and that was the reason why. This was the game that actually got me started out on this channel. It was the first game that I ever playthroughed, and unfortunately that playthrough is still unfinished as of now. Chalk that up to life getting busier in uni and stuff, and me getting into a more rigorous schedule of how to make videos and commentate on them later. Now, it might return someday, but it's going to be very hard, because since then, I've lost 2 computers. And I might be able to salvage the files from my old hard drive, but it'd be difficult, and I'm not sure how I'd be able to salvage my old save states. So, actually going back to that may take a while. But for now, though, I still have more Fire Emblem plans, and I'll talk about the next game that I got to play in the series. And that would be Radiant Dawn. Radiant Dawn, I have a very interesting history with this game. Firstly, I got spoiled in a lot of things about it. Annoyingly, the plot twists were all over the internet, which I found very frustrating. And here's the reason why I found it so frustrating. This game took 6 months between its American release and its release in Australia. I went ahead and looked that up to see if I was exaggerating. Nope, I remembered it correctly. Came out in America on November 11th, 2007. Guess when it came out in Australia? April 10th, 2008. My god, was that frustrating. 6 months I had to wait from this game when it was already out in English. 6 months! So yeah, I'm to all my viewers who live in America, I hope I don't come off as anti-America at all. If anything, I'm really envious of how early you got games released, but just bear in mind, try to sympathize with me here. Living in Australia, very often, this was the norm. I remember Super Paper Mario was also like half a year between its American and Australian releases. I think Kingdom Hearts 2 took ages as well. We would very regularly have to wait 6 months for games that were already out in America, and it was really, really frustrating. In fact, I got so frustrated that I actually wrote into Nintendo Australia and complained to them about the release gap. And eventually I got sent an automated reply, but only after, this was my email. They actually sent me a letter back. It was probably an automated response, and they only did it when an actual release date for here was confirmed, because we didn't even have a release date for a long time. But, I mean, hey, I guess that must have meant they read my letter, so that's good at least. What was even more downright frustrating was when the day finally came, when the estimated release date finally came, and I pre-ordered the game, I went to the game store expectedly, and they're like, I'm sorry, the shipment's been delayed for another week. I almost literally exploded. In fact, I think I actually had to go to the school sickbay out of sheer trauma. I'm not exaggerating, I actually did. So, yeah, I was kind of hyped for this game, which is, yeah, a bit of an understatement. So, when I finally got my hands on this game, and yeah, believe me, I was... Oh, wait a minute, I forgot to tell you the best part of that story. I was so frustrated at the release gap between America and Australia that you know what I did? I went and bought an American copy of the game from eBay. And I was like, oh, that's cool. And then I was looking it up and I was like, oh, damn it, the Wii's region locked. So, I searched all over the internet for ways to circumvent the Wii's region locking. All over the internet, and eventually I found a place that talked about mods. That I could put a mod chip in my console and it would let me circumvent region locking. I was thinking, you know what, region locking is stupid anyway, and I'm not going to use this to play pirated games. I'm going to use this to play actual legit US copies. So, I went and took my Wii console in to a place that actually did the modding. They had to solder the chip into the console, I had to live without it for a few weeks, but I got it back, and I was really excited to put in my actual US copy of Radiant Dawn and play the game early. I did. Bling blong, you must do a system update to play this game. With that, I realized that I did all that work for absolutely nothing. Because I'd done my research, and I knew that if you installed an American system update on an Australian console, or any foreign language update on a different language, not a different region console, you would brick your console permanently and it would never be usable. I was not taking that risk, so I did all that work. I think I ended up paying, I mean, it cost probably around $200 both importing the game and getting my console modded, all for absolutely nothing. So yeah, that was annoying. I still have my American copy of Radiant Dawn to this day. I'm keeping it as kind of like a, I wouldn't call it a memento. Anyway, another bit of history for you. Radiant Dawn was the game that made me swear off internet reviews entirely. Why? Well, I saw a whole bunch of reviews of Radiant Dawn that I thought were, to put it simply, complete and utter bullcrap. Now, I'll talk about this later, and I still think there are a ton of legitimate reasons to dislike this game. None of those reasons were brought up in these reviews. All these reviews did was complain about the game not making use of the Wii's features. And that's it! That's literally it! They said, most of these reviews said almost nothing about the game itself. Very little about the gameplay other than, oh, it's too hard, which I blame the localization team for that, for translating normal, hard, and maniac as easy, normal, and hard. But anyway, apart from that, very few of the reviews actually talked about the gameplay. All the reviews spent the entire review saying, the graphics aren't that great, it makes no use of the Wii pointer, the end. That made me denounce reviewers entirely. From that point on, in fact, I don't think I've ever read a review except to comment on how stupid they were. I'm sorry, but I don't trust reviews anymore after that. I know that GameSpot has lost their credibility even more since their Radiant Dawn review. I mean, their Twilight... Well, not Twilight Princess review. I heard that was pretty bad too, but their Skyward Sword review was even worse. But, yeah, Radiant Dawn. Radiant Dawn has no Mii support. Let's dock it 4 points. Really? Really? What the hell would you even do with Mii's in a Fire Emblem game? I mean, that's just stupid. I mean, the avatar system is one thing, but can you even imagine a Mii being in Fire Emblem? That makes no sense at all. So anyway, yeah, I've officially lost all faith in any and all online reviewers after that. I still watch some video reviewers on YouTube, and I mainly use YouTube Let's Plays as a source of whether or not I should buy a game. I personally feel that they're a much better indication of what someone thinks of a game than review is, so yeah, that frustrated me. So, when I finally actually got to play this game, what did I think of it? Well, okay. I know Radiant Dawn is a very controversial game within the fandom, and I understand a lot of reasons why people dislike it. A lot of the criticisms that I've seen of it, I think are perfectly valid. So if you don't like this game, I have absolutely nothing against you. In fact, I agree with a lot of points. The support system is just downright awful. They removed a whole chunk of character development just for the sake of gameplay, and especially the Dawn Brigade characters just get no development whatsoever. Especially Edward. I think Edward's awesome. He's one of my favourite characters gameplay-wise, and I would have loved to have seen him get more development. Also, you got people like Aaron and Laura. Why the heck do they not get a paired ending? Seriously. And then you have Micaiah, who, okay, it's kind of weird. I personally don't think Micaiah is a Mary Sue, only because a Mary Sue is a very specific type of character who exists solely as a wish fulfillment for the author. I think Micaiah fails this criteria majorly because nobody in their right mind would ever want to be in Micaiah's position. Not only that, but she does some very questionable things that other characters do call her out for. If she really was a Mary Sue, all those questionable things she'd use, all those amoral tactics to use during the war, everyone would say, "Ah, we forgive you immediately. And you're the most perfect person ever, please marry me." But actually no, people like Tiban call her out on it. Ikeside pretty much thinks she's a dangerous fanatic. It's kind of, and not only that, a Mary Sue has to dominate the plot. If anything, Ike fits that criteria more than Micaiah does. Ike totally dominates the moment he enters the picture. Micaiah, the moment Ike comes into the story, she's pretty much demoted to extra. In fact, in part 4, she spends the entire thing as a glorified mouthpiece for another character. That's kind of the exact opposite of what a Mary Sue is meant to be. But I will say that you can call Micaiah a badly written, poorly developed character if you want. A lot of things about her got very little explanation, her relationships with other characters were not exactly very well handled, and she doesn't exactly come off as the most likable or interesting character overall. But I still think she's not a Mary Sue. And yeah, other things about the game's plot, they did kind of go downhill in Part 4. I still personally think that Part 4 is a little weak. The voice acting really doesn't help there. Radiant Dawn has some of the worst voice acting I've seen in a Nintendo game, and that is really saying something, but yeah, Awakening voice acting, this ain't. Radiant Dawn is just outright so bad it's good when it comes to voice acting. Goldoa will not move. And please, don't make me remember the horrible trauma that is Child Ike. Ugh. That being said though, Radiant Dawn is in fact my second favourite game in the entire series. And this is kind of weird, but like Fire Emblem 4, I really like the epic feel of it. The fact that you've got some chapters that have as many as 80 enemies on the map. The fact that chapters have such an epic scale. You have huge armies of NPCs occasionally. The 3-tier class system, just how high your stats get. The sheer number of legendary weapons you have by the endgame. The sheer scale of some of the endgame bosses. I still personally think the actual final boss fight is by far my favourite Fire Emblem boss in Fire Emblem history. And the only final boss in the whole series that actually feels like a real boss fight. When I played that, I just thought, that is how you do a boss fight in a turn-based strategy game. That was just brilliant. I love how your whole team gets to contribute. In a lot of other Fire Emblem final bosses, just the main lords with the legendary weapons that were effective against the boss would actually be able to do stuff. In Radiant Dawn, your whole team has to contribute to taking the boss down. The boss is pretty much the only enemy in the map you have to contend with, and the map, it just feels like a giant puzzle, and I love that. And the music doesn't help too. Radiant Dawn has some very good music. I admit that it does have some very, very bad tracks as well. A few of the map themes I personally think are some of the worst in the series, and some of the others are some of the best in the series, like Eternal Bond and, oh man, Bearer of Hope. I love Bearer of Hope so much. In fact, all of the chapters that play Bearer of Hope are some of my favourite chapters ever, simply on account of that music, and well, I mean, Elincia's Gambit is one of my favourite defense missions ever, and so is 313. I love 313. Speaking of which, multiple perspective storytelling is something that I'm a huge fan of, and to me, that is why I love Radiant Dawn so much. Just for Part 3 alone. The fact that you play two separate armies that are on opposite sides of a war, and that neither is depicted as evil or in the wrong. It really makes the conflict feel more realistic, and it reminded me a lot of one of my favourite books that I had to study in high school. It was a retelling of the Trojan War, but every chapter was told from the perspective of a different character, and I really liked that you would, you know, be seeing the war from opposite sides, and just switch between them in different chapters. And it really reminded me of Radiant Dawn and how that felt. I love the fact that you would actually have to fight characters who you'd been playing as a few chapters earlier. I do admit the balance between Team Ike and Team Micaiah is fairly bad, and that's another low point in the game. But still, I just really love Part 3 for some reason. So, yeah, I admit Radiant Dawn has its flaws, but it actually is a really personal game for me. Again, mostly due to the fact that I spent so long waiting for it. I have a pretty serious history of this game, and I would really like to do a playthrough of it one day. In fact, it's probably the next Fire Emblem playthrough that I'd be considering after Awakening. Mostly because I don't hate the game nearly as much as most people do, so I think it would be interesting for some people to get a perspective from a player who doesn't, in fact, hate the game. I just realized this video is running pretty long, so you know what I think? I think I'm actually going to have to split this into two videos. So, that's the first half of my Fire Emblem retrospective. Yeah, I'm such a big fan of this series that I have a lot to say about it. So, next time I'll talk about the games that I haven't mentioned yet. So, I'll see you then.